let's cue the music and start that podcast.
Hello, I'm Mark Allen. This week we have Lynne Murphy. Lynne is author of The Prodigal Tongue, the love-hate relationship between American and British English, under the M's on my shelf. Looks like that in the US, looks different in the UK, and we can ask her about why that is. Lynn's a prolific blogger. You hopefully have looked at her separated by a common language blog, which examines the differences that ended up in her book. She also has another blog that I would like to talk to her about that you may not be aware of. She's very active on Twitter, which is where I first became aware of her. She tweets a difference of the day between British and American English. And Lynne, I believe you're from New York. Is that correct? And
New York State.
New York State, yes.
Yeah.
And you did your undergraduate in Massachusetts. You went to Illinois, and you've been to South Africa, Texas. Now you're in the UK, where it seems you settled down with the family and everything else. So first, how are you doing? How is the isolation in southern England coming along?
I think it suits me in a strange way. I was very lucky because I'm on sabbatical this term. So I have not had to do any of the getting used to teaching all your classes online or anything like that. The hardest bit has been that my dad's not well, but very, very happily, I went to see him at the beginning of March and got back just in time before flights shut down. So that bit's a little stressful, but the being at home, I can keep very busy. Oh, I like your teacup.
Yes. I don't know if everybody could see that with speaker view, but this is a teacup I don't know that I've ever used before. And honestly, I cannot remember where I got it or why, but I think it was probably a gift. So it's a Union Jack, and it's filled with hot tea, which I think you use the vulgar cold tea, right? Is that correct?
I do like cold tea, iced tea. I haven't got much iceable tea in England at the moment, but it is my preferred kind of tea.
Okay, well that's fine. And so you're an American living in England. I grew up English in Michigan until I went to school and realized that there was a different way of talking and different accents to be found, and I lost. I just did the quiz on your website, the Prodigal Tongue website. Are you an American or are you a Brit? In terms of, it's a quiz of 10 questions for each language, and it determines where you fit. And I got 10 out of 10. I was Uncle Sam, an American, and I thought I'd do better on the English site, but I got 3 out of 10. Dick Van Dyke. To me, a washcloth was a flannel for the first, my entire growing up period, but I blanked on that and got that one wrong. So I've lost much of what I learned and what I'm used to is in my youth. So so this is a website you set up for the book, and also on the website is a whole bunch of a list of words, and I think we'll get the link up in the chat. But tell us about the website. It's like a ancillary to the book?
Yeah, so I've got two websites related to the British American thing. One's separated by a common language, which I see has already been shared in the chat. And the other one is the one for the book, so theprodigaltongue.com. And the blog is just, it's been going since 2006. And it's, you know, at this point, I'm able to do one a week on some particular British American difference or alleged British American difference. Sometimes they don't turn out to be that different. And then the prodigaltongue.com is stuff from around the book. So that lists where I'm doing events. So this was listed on it. It has the 2 quizzes, and it also has an index. That might be what you're referring to with the list of words. So the book itself has an index, which, you know, is the things that the indexers saw fit to index. But along the way, I had to make decisions all the time about which English I was going to use when writing a sentence. So, you know, if I was writing, well, the example we had in your advertisement for this one was at home versus home. You know, so if I had written, I'm staying home, you know, I would have to then make the decision, do I leave that in what I've written because it's my voice? Or do I put at home because that's more British or what? And I couldn't mark all those in the book. So on the blog, every time I know I'm doing something that's particularly American or particularly British, I'll mark it. And I mark all the alternative spellings and things like that. But I couldn't do that in the flow of a book. It would be too disruptive over 300 pages. So on the website for the book, there is an index of all the things that I know I did that are not one or the other, and it translates between them or explains what the British idiom or American idiom means.
I think at least on my end, there's a little bit of a phase shift, science fiction-y slow down there, but I heard everything you said. And so I think we're good. But we'll hope that the internet is in our favor tonight. And it's night there. 9:30 is your time.
Yeah.
In England. I gather you stay up fairly late. You're a bit of a night owl.
I am a night owl, definitely. Yeah.
So we're not keeping you up here.
No.
Okay. Question about the book. So this is 3 years ago, 2017?
No, 18. 2 years.
18. Okay. So it's been out 2 years, and this has brought you. I mean, you did radio, you did talks on this topic before that, but the book is probably added some prominence to that. How do you, as an American in England, tell the English that maybe their ideas about what American is, maybe it's not so bad as they think it is? Has there been a lot of pushback?
Well, I try to do it with humor, and if you want to get any respect, you know, from British people, you try to weave humor into what you're talking about and not take yourself too seriously. So the book started years before, I mean, the idea for the book started years before, when I was invited to give a 15-minute talk at something called the Catalyst Club. It's you pay £8, you go in and you get 3 15-minute talks and you don't know what they'll be about. So I gave a talk there called How America Saved the English Language. And that became a 40-minute talk, which became an hour-long talk, which then became the book. So when I started the book, it was my challenge in talking about these things is not talking to British people about it, it's talking to American people about it. Because I suppose 20 years here, I'm more used to talking to British people now, and I can predict what are the things they're going to complain about, or what are the things they're going to say, oh, yes, but. Whereas with Americans, I think, well, British people uniformly know more about America than Americans know about Britain. So since Americans' British knowledge is more individualized to the individuals, I'm never quite sure how to frame the talks for Americans as easily as I can for the British.
Huh. So are there, sticking with the British, are there some particular things you say, I'm sure you get sort of the same things over and over. Are there certain things that exasperate you that you say, this is the losing fight, but I was asked about it, I've got to sort of explain what's going on here?
I mean, I don't think any of the fights are completely losing fights. It just depends on whether you've got somebody who's a stick in the mud or somebody who's actually going to listen. So, you know, if you can start it off with, okay, which one's older isn't which one's better, then it doesn't hurt as much when you show that some of the American things are older. Right. You know, and so you sort of, you know, you go back and forth with it. But, you know, there are definitely things where people will say, well, I still don't like it. And I'm like, well, fair enough. That's your taste. And everybody, you know, can have their own taste. It's just when you go about telling untruths about the language that I'm going to call you up on it.
Right, right. And that's, do you feel like you're doing the linguist's work in bringing that to the people?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I like doing best, you know, that I've had the benefit of a lot of education on this, a lot of opportunity to talk to people about this, to practice talking about it in classrooms. And so, you know, now what I want to do is just make that available where I can.
Mm. Was this something that sort of started with your taking a job at the University of Sussex? Or were you interested in those language differences before that?
Well, I'm always interested in words. So, you know, my training is as a lexicologist, a studier of vocabulary. And so before I lived in England, I lived in South Africa for 4 years, as you mentioned. So I was already used to thinking about, you know, there are a lot of different words for things, and that's interesting. I'd already worked on dictionaries and that sort of stuff. So I'm very minded toward cataloging language. Mm-hmm. So I didn't come to England with an intention to study British English at all. As you noted, I think a lot about antonyms, and that's what I was doing when I moved here. But as I'd probably say this in the book somewhere, I started writing the blog as a procrastination thing because I had another book to write. So, you know, it was something that built up first by blogging and getting a lot of positive feedback from the blog, and then by giving the talks and really getting positive feedback from the talks. And that just made me want to do more. And it was great because I'm not a sociolinguist, I'm not a historical linguist, but I've had to become all those things to do this. And so it's been really exciting to learn as much as I've got to learn.
So what's your next? You're working on a book now, right?
I am. Yeah, well.
Procrastinating.
Yeah, lockdown working is not the same as working. I have a book that I'm only in the second chapter of it, but it's tentatively called Small Words. And my idea for it is that people are always writing books about lovely, rare words or obscene words. You know, there's so many books of Shakespeare's insults. You know, there are so many books of beautiful nature words or words that English forgot that we should revive, and things, or words you should know. And my idea was nobody's writing books about of and the and in. And all those little small words, the words that are sort of the top 25 in English vocabulary, in terms of how often we use them, they can tell us so much about how minds work, about how language change works. They can tell you, you know, They look at them when they're testing to see who's a psychotic and who's a
Really?
sane, you know, those sorts of things. So there are so many things that you can do with those little words. And
Can you
so that's what I
expand
want
on
to try
that?
to explore.
Yeah.
I'm not going to expand on the psychotic bit because I haven't got to that
Okay.
chapter yet, so I'm not 100% on it. But there's another book by James something. Oh, it's going to come to me later. But the name of the book is The Secret Life of Pronouns. So that's his specialism, is what can, looking at function words, Pennebaker, thank you, Laurel. What can function words tell you about the people who use them or about the texts that they're in? So that stuff related to that is one chapter of my book, but there are other chapters. The final chapter will probably be related to the talk that I gave at the Mediterranean Editors and Translators Conference back in September, when I could travel, which was about how English has been densifying. So we use fewer words to get the same information across than people 100 years ago did. And that means that we're using a lot less the, and we're using a lot less of. We're, you know, instead of saying, you know, the Prime Minister of Britain, we say Britain's Prime Minister, things like that, you know. So those small words are disappearing thanks to editors. And I'm going to sort of raise the question of, you know, are editors word murderers, or are they cultivating a nice garden?
Are they word? Sorry, they word
Murderers.
murderers. Murderers.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
sure both.
That's why I'm wearing my editorial necklace today for all the editors here. Cutting.
Oh, that's very nice. It doesn't work, does it? Because it actually does, it is hinged.
It does move, but it does not cut.
Does not cut. Okay, that's good. Good. Safe that way around your neck. Don't run with it.
I will not.
Yes.
You'll never see me running.
Does your daughter has been your daughter must be at 10?
12.
12? Okay, 12. So she's getting into that tween period. She's in the tween period. She's getting into the teen period. Does she still respect you and the way you speak?
She's not a British American linguistic snob, although I often tell the story of when she was 2, she said, Daddy say bath, or Daddy say bath, you say bath. And I said, which one are you going to say? And she said bath. So I knew where she stood 10 years ago. But she's not a British American snob. She is, I have been noticing class differences in English in Britain, which is a very big deal in Britain. So she's got that kind of ear that English people naturally get for what somebody's accent telling about them. But I do, she's got very into her father's hobbies. You've gone all sci-fi.
Yeah. Just the last few seconds, you said something has.
I think maybe I was saying that she's getting into all of her father's hobbies right now, but like watching Doctor Who. My influence is still that she's got a very good linguist's intuition about language, and I love that.
I think that might be a common thing, and linguists who have children, I'm thinking you hear a lot of specific examples. I'm talking about my child said this, my son said this. So it must be really fascinating to have that training and then watch your child come home from school every day and say things and talk about things that were said. Yeah,
if I had been really organized, I would have recorded her as she was, learning language. But I was, first-time mother. I was just a little bit overwhelmed. So but I did keep track of her first 200 words. No.
Oh, really?
I'll
Interesting.
keep that close to my heart forever. Yeah, I had a chart on the door to write down every time I heard a new word.
That's a great one. My daughter's first name was Hi, and that just blew me away because I would come in every morning when she was in her crib, and I'd say hi. And so one morning she said hi, and I thought, so that was the only one I recorded.
That was my first word too, according to my mother.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So what was your daughter's first word?
It's very embarrassing.
Oh, okay.
Her first word was boob.
Boob. Was that, you sure that was legit, or was it just an accidental? She was
all of her first sort of eight of her first 10 words had a B in a vowel. So like there was boo for blueberry and buff for bottle, and they were all very similar, but she knew what she was saying.
She said it correctly. It wasn't just making sounds then.
Yeah.
Like my daughter, when she'd say da 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 da, and I'd say, yeah, she's saying my name, and really she was just saying da 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 da.
Yeah.
So boo, that's good. That's good information to know. So I was going to ask you, what's the most surprising of those first 200 words? So other than that, which may have been.
I don't know that any were particularly surprising. I mean, it was the things around her. I do teach child language acquisition, so I sort of had my idea of what was going to come, and it was pretty much what came. Small things that the child can handle are what they tend to name, and things that move.
Things that move?
Move.
So I was about to ask, you talked about the class differences that she's becoming aware of, and I hate to ask just like quantifying questions, but looking at America and the regional differences, and in England you have the regional and the class differences, and of course in America you do have, I suppose, class differences, but to a lesser extent. Is there more? So for an actor trying to do regional language, is it more difficult to do American for a British actor, or to do British for an American actor?
I think the main difference is that American actors don't tend to get trained in dialect as much. Mm-hmm. So if you go to drama school here, my understanding is that they spend a lot of time on learning to do different kinds of accents and to have an ear for those accents. And so, that has been explained to me as the reason why you've got so many British actors going to Hollywood playing American characters. I mean, half the people in The Wire seemed to be British, but you wouldn't know it from watching The Wire. So yeah, it seems to be more about training, but also maybe they naturally have the ear. But you would think that actors in general would be ear-oriented.
Right. Well, but in terms of, and I use that as sort of an example, but in terms of differences, do you get more variation in the UK than you do in the US, or vice versa? You
get more geographically concentrated variation. Yeah. I mean, but it's sort of comparable to something like New York, right? People from New York can probably tell. Well, actually, I've recently take that away. I've recently read a paper that the accents in New York are exaggerated, but let's take it to Boston. In Boston, people can tell sort of which side of Boston people come from, and they can tell who's Harvard and who's not, who's towny, and that kind of thing. So there you've got a big concentration of different accents, and that's, and then you just need to go a little ways to get to the Connecticut River and get really different accents. So that sort of small area with lots of different accents is sort of more like England, whereas in America, once you hit the West. Once you hit the plains, things
Yeah.
become very difficult to tell apart. So there's not as much there.
Interesting. Um, let's jump to this is the question I've been most wanting to ask you. Jumping to the back of the book, the last chapter you talked about the the idea that you have British English and an American English, and then you have this other English which is neither British nor American, and of course you have Indian English and Canadian English, which Canadians, let's face it, is just kind of a blend. But but there's also this idea that you have an English that is the lingua franca that's not doesn't belong to anyone and has its own sort of way of speaking that is, for non-native English speakers.
Yeah, I'd say that there isn't one, there's lots, So
Okay.
some people try to say, oh, we're all going to speak Globish. We're all going to,
Right.
English is going to be somehow reduced to some lowest common denominator. And that's not what I want to say. What I want to say is we've spent, so I think I say the 19th century was the British century, the 20th century was the American century, and the 21st century, if English continues to be relevant, is sort of the second language speakers century, so world English's century. But that doesn't mean we all have to talk the same. I mean, we've been doing very well within our countries and across our countries, speaking a lot of different Englishes and understanding each other. So just because more people are speaking it doesn't mean it has to all become the same. What we are seeing in both countries is that the differences within the countries are becoming more regional rather than local. And so the more we talk to each other, the more similar we get. When people just lived in one village, there were more differences from village to village. But now that people commute 30 miles to work, those differences can't withstand time as well. So the more we do talk to each other, the more we can, expect that there will be things that become similar. But at the same time, we always want to keep our own identity. So as long as it's important to me to sound American, to the extent that I sound American, or for somebody else to sound like they came from the hood or whatever, we're going to keep sending those signals. But then we don't only send those signals. We can vary our speech, depending on who we're with. And there's no reason to think we'll stop doing that.
Sure. Interesting. The antonym thing, I find, is it just me or is that just a lot of fun to look at antonyms of all things to look at?
Well, if you look at my blog, you'll think that it's a lot of fun because it's
a lot of cartoons.
It's a lot of cartoons. It's a lot of jokes because I read them and I think, oh, that's got to go on the blog. Yeah, my PhD was in looking at how vocabulary might be organized in the brain. Or in the mind, I should say. So, do you have a dictionary in your mind or do you have a thesaurus in your mind, basically? And so I've done a lot of work looking at antonyms, synonyms, and other kinds of nyms, but antonyms are always my favorite because they raise so many interesting questions. Why are we so focused on having twos of things? Why do we like to force things into black and white sort of categories rather than acknowledging the gray and things like that? So there's a lot of interesting things going on there. And I've studied it in terms of how antonyms help children learn vocabulary, how different cultures use antonyms. And that's what I think is one of the more interesting things. So in English speaking culture, we're very much, it's black or it's white. But if you look at how cases where people are willing to say, well, actually, I'm not just happy about that, I'm sad too. I'm happy and sad about this thing. We can say that in English, but the fact of the matter is people say it quite a bit more in Swedish And they say it quite a bit more than that in Japanese. So whether we see antonyms as being things that cannot coexist or things that do coexist, whether we're looking for the edges or the middles, is something that I find kind of interesting on a cultural level. So those are the kinds of things that amuse me about antonyms.
Yes, that amuses me too. That's really interesting. And what's your, so are there, I mean, can you say there are cultural differences in the way we look at
I think so.
things?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you look at, I mean, at this point, we're sort of becoming armchair psychologists, you know,
Yeah, sure.
but, you know, if you look at something like Japanese culture being much more happy with things being happy and sad at the same time than English speaking cultures. And then you look at sort of the idea of good and evil in Christianity versus, you know, ideas in Confucianism, you know, you might think, okay, well, this is part of a general cultural bent toward treating pairs of things in certain ways. You know, are pairs of things complements, or are they at war somehow? And I think that's kind of interesting. And then in the Swedish case, you've got the thing called lagom culture in Sweden, where you're always looking for the just right, like Goldilocks. And in a culture where you're looking for the just right, you might not do quite as much of the you know, starkness. Now, I have to say, mostly we use antonyms completely the same across all these cultures. It's just these little statistically significant but small differences that are interesting.
Okay. Is this a nod to your love of antonyms, the love-hates in the title?
Absolutely. And one of the things that we have to do as in academia in the UK is we have to have all of our research reviewed every 7 years by a government agency, basically, to see whether our universities will be funded to continue researching. And one of the things I have to do for that is to demonstrate how my work has been a flow of work, and how my work has affected the world in some way. And basically that was the story I made up for the last time was, well, I started out teaching antonyms, and look, I've got a new antonym, British versus American, and that's what I'm studying now. And it all goes through there.
Is there like a class on antonyms that you teach that people sign up for?
No, I teach, all the teaching here pretty much is at undergraduate level. So the graduate students just do research. So, but I do, my first class that I teach to the first years in the first term is called Approaches to Meaning. So they get some antonyms there. And in that class, everybody has to adopt a word and analyze the heck out of that word for a term. And so it's to get them to think about, okay, well, you've chosen the word woke. What's the opposite of woke? Or you've chosen the word fit. What's the opposite of fit? You know, whatever. So we get to talk about it a bit.
Okay, well that also sounds like fun. Did you go online for your classes? I don't know what the term period is there.
Well, I will have to next term, but since I'm on sabbatical now, I haven't.
Oh, that's right. You're on sabbatical. You're writing the book. You're on chapter 2. We don't have to.
I know I should be a lot further, but it has been disruptive.
Yes, yeah, certainly. And did your daughter come home from school then? Is the school closed?
So she's not been in school since the 22nd of March.
And has it been like here? I don't have children in school anymore, so I don't know what it's like. But I hear from others that, you know, it's this whole, they're so now immersed in their children's education because they're second teachers.
I've been sort of letting her get on with it, but I also think it is a bit different here than it is in the States. When I've heard other people, my friends, talk about their kids, they're Zooming with their teachers, and my child has not seen a teacher's face since the 22nd of March. She's just been sent work. And it looks like all they're doing is just trying to keep them active and not forgetting what they've already learned. It really doesn't look like they're trying to teach them new things.
Teach new things. Oh,
yeah, I think they're very aware of the fact that, you know, while people are at home, it's a great opportunity for big divisions in progress to happen. And I think they're being cautious about letting that happen too much.
I see. Well, we have some questions from the audience. We have a nice sized audience and several questions. And Heather is going to unmute and ask some people to ask their questions of Lynne Murphy.
Yes, I think we should start with Bob's. Bob, do you want to unmute and ask?
Hi there. How are you doing, Lynn?
Hi.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Canadian, so like Mark said, it is a blend. But
we do have a Canadian in the audience.
Yeah, originally from Vancouver area, so I'm in Manitoba now. But like Mark said, we have a blend. But when you do go to a drop-down menu in a lot of programs, much like the Australian counterpart of me, we're either given the choice of American or we're given the choice of British English. And even in something like British English, like the ISE or, you know, the endings, because of spell checking and stuff like that over the last 30 years, have you found that there's a lot more of a consistency and less alternate spellings within a community itself?
Yeah, I write about this in the book, particularly about the ISE, IZE, or IZE, if you prefer. Spellings, because I could watch that change while I lived here for 20 years. And there's a lovely paper by a Japanese scholar who looked at IZE versus ISE over time in Britain and found that basically about 1995 is when the S's rose. So before that, you got a lot of S's in the Victorian era, but you know, people liked S's or Z's, they didn't really mind. But then the Oxford English Dictionary came out and took the position toward the Z. And so at that point, you get a lot of British publishers saying, well, we're going to go with what the Oxford English Dictionary says. But then around 1995, the Z's just went zoom, way down. And what happened then? I think spell check happened then. And once spell check when spell check first started coming in, people didn't know how to reset it for British English, or they got things that only did American English, and they would be told, you can't spell this with an S, and they'd get annoyed. Because computers want consistency. They don't care what country you're from. They just want you to spell it the same way every time. And so at that point, that's when people started saying, well, I'm British, so I use the S. Before that, it was not particularly not British to use the Z, or the Z. But at that point, people started perceiving the Z as the American spelling rather than the Oxford spelling. And that's why we've got such a split in that now. So spell checking counterintuitively has made English and British and American spelling more different rather than more similar.
That is fascinating. And I noticed this myself, that the Oxford Dictionary of English, a lot of the first spellings are the Z, and then also in British, the S. And the Guardian newspaper, their style guide doesn't necessarily prefer the S for some words, has the Z for some words. So, that's so amazingly counterintuitive that spell check would sort of bring people into their camps instead of.
Yeah, I mean, when people talk about globalization, they often think it is going to be us all becoming the same. But the other thing that does is remind you who you are when you see, you know, a lot of different cultures and different spellings. So, you know, it has sort of given people an idea of British spelling that wasn't there before.
Huh. And I, you know, I knew there were Canadians in the audience. I don't want to disparage these wonderful Canadians we have here. In Canada, you know, there's, I don't know how broad this is, but I think there's a lot of sense of disappointment that Oxford doesn't produce a Canadian dictionary anymore. And there is sort of this, and I hear from my Canadian copy editor friends, a little frustration with the fact that there's no national dictionary really of Canada. And I'm seeing some comments in the chat that are with lots of exclamation points agreeing to that. So national identity is, I suppose, in Australia. Can we talk about a little bit Australia? I imagine it's a little bit like, you know, Canada, where it's very much the British style, but there are some differences. And then I think, and then moving on from there, you know, we have India, which is can be quite a different language. I mean, I hear, I've, you know, done some work for an Indian company, and there are some words and expressions and usages that I'm not sure where they come from, but they're really unfamiliar to me.
Yeah. I think, you know, when people talk about British and American English in other parts of the world, very often mostly what they're talking about is the spelling. So, you know, Canadians spell some words like the English, not all of the ones, you know, they're definitely a mixed system. Australia has a lot more like the British, and also more vocabulary in common with the British versus the Canadians, which I hate to tell you, have very little in common with the British anymore. But, you know, it is, everybody tells me, oh, we're half and half. And I'm like, oh, you know, if you want to think that, you can. But you know, that's a bit of, yeah, I don't mind anyone wanting to distance themselves from the United States at some time. I do understand the urge. But yeah, Australia is going to be closer to Britain for a few reasons, one of which is that they were settled later. You know, so a lot of the, well, Canada didn't get English speakers in numbers until much later than the United States did. So they're not that far off, Australia, in terms of how new their English is. But Australia, you know, was, I mean, I suppose the big thing with Australia was there was a huge immigration push from Britain to Australia in the 20th century. So they were constantly getting their British English refreshed, as well as being more recently settled. So yeah, so they have more reason to be closer to Britain. But then they've got all their own things too, you know, so, you know, they call a bell pepper or capsicum, you know, various things that are different from both. And then they are finding these days that they do get Americanisms rather than Britishisms for newer things because of greater contact with America through media.
And what about India? Do you have a sense?
So India, I'm a little bit distracted here because the hamster is very desperate to get out of his cage and he's sort of flying. Anyway.
We have cats wander by, you know, quite often. I, you know, if you want to let the hamster out, we can follow it around.
That's okay. I'm just afraid he's going to crash in a second. Yeah, Indian English has a lot of interesting things in it. If you read an Indian newspaper, you will find all sorts of turns of phrase that have evolved there separately. A lot of things in bureaucracy. There's a lot of bureaucracy, it seems, in India, and there are a lot of bureaucratic terms that seem very particular to it. But in terms of where they're oriented now, of course, they had the British there, and you know, until well into the 20th century. and then, you know, separated from the British, but kept having an idea of, well, our English should be like the English back in Britain. That's the real English. But in more recent times, you know, there have been huge numbers of Indian people going to work in America or going to study in America. And of course, there are probably Indian call centers for American companies and other things like that. So at this point, India, in terms of which English they're oriented to, it's really a mixed bag, as far as I can see, with some people wanting particularly to use American spellings, American pronunciations, in order to, you know, better travel to the US.
Well, what about getting back to international English? I've done some editing for the UN, United Nations. I believe their style is, from what I gather, mostly British English in terms of spelling. Is international English the corporate English, the English that people, when organizations get together around the table and all speak English? Is that going to be more the British or the?
I think that is going to differ to some degree from company culture to company culture. But, you know, the United States has 6 times the economy that Britain has, 5 times the people. So, you know, if you're going to say, well, we're an international company and we want to hit, you know, America, that's, you know, that's a good market to break. So, you know, I would assume some are definitely oriented toward that. Of course, Mark Twain thought if you spelt your words shorter, you could save a lot of money on your printing. So, you know, it's smart to leave out the U's.
There you go. It'd be interesting to see how it evolves in the European Union without an English-speaking country as a member.
Well, you do have Ireland,
Oh,
and you do have
you
Malta.
mentioned
So you've got 2 countries that have, I think Malta has official English as a co-language, but anyway, it's widely spoken. And they will, you know, their history is using the British spelling. So I would assume it would stay that way.
I know we have more questions, and I always tend to talk too much myself and not give people a chance to ask. So I'm going to try to let some people ask questions and not interject as much.
We have 2 actually about accents. The first one comes from Mike Pope. Mike, if you want to unmute and ask.
It was just a quick one. It's where are you finding that that the British accent is seeping into your own speech?
You could probably tell me. My T's are the main thing. I think that me hitting my T's hard in the middle of words like water, that's very noticeable to a lot of Americans. And I think it's that alone which makes Americans ask me if I'm from England when I go to America. Some of my vowels have moved. So early on at my Scrabble club, an elderly man made fun of how I say box in my Rochester, New York accent, box. And so I now say box. So my short O vowels have changed. My short A vowel, like in grass, is probably not, when I'm talking to an English person, is probably some place in between grass and grass. So yeah, those kinds of places. And then there will be the individual words that have different pronunciations, you know, like vitamin, or can't think of what else.
Aluminium.
I don't say aluminium.
No.
Just avoid that word.
Our second one was from Stuart. Stuart, if you want to unmute.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi. Lynn, you mentioned that British accents are complicated by both geography and class. And I'm kind of wondering, as an American hearing a British accent, do you pick up on the geographical accent or the class first? Do you listen to someone and hear, think, oh, they're from the southeast? Or do you go, ah, they're posh? Do you perceive the class thing and the geographical thing separately or together, I guess?
am a semanticist for a reason. I work on words and meanings and not on accents because I don't have an ear for it. So what I do is I say to my husband, well, where are they from? He tells me. There was a famous example in on our sofa watching TV. We were watching a British cooking show, and I thought the judge was from France and he was from Ireland. That's how bad I am in accents. So yeah, there are some cues I can pick up that somebody might be a bit posh, as they say, but I have to think about it to notice it. I'm not the kind of person who the first thing I notice is how they're talking. So yeah, I'd say I notice if they talk like me or if they don't talk like me, or if they talk like my husband or they don't talk like my husband, but I won't necessarily be able to place them.
What is the accent where you are? How would you
Well,
describe it?
Brighton is an hour south of London, and it is a big commuter area for London. So basically, everything in the southeast is very similar to each other, unless you're talking to old fishermen here, you're not going to hear much of a traditional Sussex accent. So everybody's sort of, general southeastern. Some people talk about estuary English, which is a certain brand of that. I think it's not always the most accurate description of it, but not quite Hugh Grant, but general sort of Englishy English. That's how bad an accent I
Well,
am.
yeah, you're not.
This is why I rarely write about accents in the blog.
Right, and honestly, I'm the same way. I don't hear accents. I don't think very well because because I have so many family members who have the accent, and I can't. My kids do a great, Harry Potter English accent, and I can't do that. I can't bring myself to sort of hear it to say it. And people ask me about it as an editor, about these, pronunciation differences, and I have to say, I just don't do. I deal with words.
I have to look things up, and the one resource I've been recommending to people a lot lately is there's something called Youglish, Youglish, which is a site that brings together video clips from YouTube of people saying particular words. And so you can go on there and you can say, I want to hear somebody say crisp in English, in British English, and in American English, and then you can hear 100 people saying that word. And you just keep hitting the forward button and hearing the next person. So that's a really helpful thing if you're interested in word pronunciations and how they differ.
Are there some good resources? We have a lot of copy editors in the audience. Are there some resources you'd recommend for language?
The one I thought you might ask me that question, so I brought something with me.
Just came to me.
So there's this book. It's by John Algeo, A-L-G-E-O, called British or American English. It's not brand new. It's probably 12 years old. But at least it's probably more than that. But it's based on corpus linguistics, so looking at large bits of text. It's not a dictionary. It's the grammatical differences between British and American English. So if you wanted to know which preposition you should put after protest, that this will tell you in British it's one thing, in American it's another thing. So it's all those sorts of little, is it right to phrase it that way kind of things that you can easily find in this book. For dictionaries, I think you just look online in dictionaries, because most English dictionaries, reputable ones, are pretty good at covering. what's out there. The key is
Right.
just to be aware of whose dictionary you're looking at. If you're looking at a British dictionary, they're not going to mark British things as British. If you look at Merriam-Webster, they will. But look at a few dictionaries for words,
Mm-hmm.
and you're fine with that. You don't need a specialist dictionary for that, I don't think.
Right. We're almost out of time. We'll try to keep it to an hour, but we do at least one more question, I believe.
Yes, actually, we have one. We have a couple. So actually, we were wondering if you had the name of that paper or the author of that paper, just if you think of it, about the ISEIZE spelling. And then there was a question about regionalism in American English pronunciation. And Karen Cook was wondering if it's not studied as much because it's often how we make fun of each other, i.e. the Manitowoc Minute. I don't know if I said that correctly.
Minute. Manitowoc? Is that?
There you go.
Right.
Okay. The Manitowoc Minute. I'm not familiar with that.
When I teach a class called English in the United States. I've only taught it since I wrote The Prodigal Tongue. I wanted an outlet for all the things I'd learned. And one of the things I do with the students to show them about American English is to show them a lot of Saturday Night Live sketches. Because there are all those ones that, the ones about the Bears that make fun of Chicago accents, and the Californians, and different, lots of different sketches on Saturday Night Live. And I do it not saying to them, now don't learn about these accents from these parodies of them, but notice that Americans notice different regional accents. British people do not hear our different regional accents in the way that Americans don't hear different British accents. So British people will tell me, but you don't have accents in America. And I say, haven't you ever watched The Sopranos? We do have accents, and we do use them as a rich source of humor. It's not, we have our snobbery as well about that they're good accents and bad accents, but it's not quite as tinged. What we have in America in terms of class, and I really got this, in a lot of this from my mother, was we judge people's grammar in a way. That's what we pay attention to. So my mother could never get over that she'd married into a family where people said he don't. That's the kind of thing that Americans are more apt to make judgments on rather than whole scale accents in terms of what's good English. People stereotype American accents in terms of intelligence and other things like that, but they're less. Well, we haven't got a name for the right accent in America the way there is a name for the right accent in Britain, which is received pronunciation. So, we just don't focus our attention quite in the same way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it has been a wonderful hour. It's great to see you again. And it's great to see so many people here participating till the end and engaged. And this is always a lot of fun. Next week, we have the quad, which is 7 guests at once. So it's going to be a bit of a party. So I hope you all can come back next week. 7 different copy editors featured. So thank you very much.